The
Broncos are going to lose today. Never. It's nothing special. Small. 49ers are biased on KD. That is a stupid idea. No. If I can't take it when my team, I'll give the Colts the benefit of the doubt. Madden 21 was so bad.
I'm gonna show last time I'm getting my body in the gym.
Has he played? Has he started in the
Right to tell you.
Tag him on Instagram. Second, and all these tantrums. I could have.
Monte Foreman coming out of Texas.
Truly appreciate the offer. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 10 of That One Dude 2020. I have a huge special guest, Michael Hulse, producer of the Colin Cowherd Podcast, managing editor of theherdnow.com, 3Now, All Boys, the Boys and Girls Podcast, inside the Rob Parker. My man, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the invite.
Again, it's a lot of definitely looking forward to it and kind of getting to know like your career and the conceptions people may not know or misconceptions because they just see one guy typing, one guy on air. But my question to you though is, in your career so far, what has been your favorite moment or individual game or whatever that you have covered?
Well, I mean, I've done a lot more, right now I'm working on a lot of podcasts. It'd probably be more like a podcast guest or, just a moment like that. Just recently, we did a podcast with Mark Cuban. That was really just an amazing experience for me. I mean, and like I said, I have a sort of a non-traditional route that I came into the business. So, I really kind of look at everything from the perspective of, not someone that's, done it for 20 years, but someone that's basically fought his way to get into it. And so I savor every one of those little moments where you just kind of got to take a minute and appreciate it.
And of course, that's exactly like I tell people. I mean, you never know what can happen. And it's been doing this for years. A lot of fun. And again, folks, if anybody wants to get into it, it's more about friendships. Don't worry about the numbers, any of that. 'Cause that will come over time. But the people you've met and the things you've done, who's been your biggest influence of what you're doing? What got you so passionate about sports?
Just as far as just like getting into sports, I come from a pretty big family. I have a brother, I have two stepbrothers, and we all played sports. My stepdad is a former sports writer, and he always just kind of fostered our interest in sports. And then we always just kind of like as a group with my brothers and I, we were always, the time when we grew up, obviously there wasn't YouTube and there wasn't, a million ways to watch as many sports or as many options as we have now. So we'd have to get up every day before school. And I can still remember, like sitting around the breakfast table, there was like a really small TV and we'd all watch like the first 20 minutes of Sports Center. And then we go to school. It was like, that's, years and years of that. And, so we're just always kind of into it, obviously played sports growing up, and just were really passionate about it. And I grew up in most of the time in Ohio, so there's obviously like the Browns and the Buckeyes. There's just a huge passionate fan base about teams like that. So,
of course, I mean, I don't know who your team is, but I'm the Broncos, and we've been let down for a couple of years now. So,
well, I'm a Browns fan, so for my entire childhood, the Broncos, are the devil incarnate because they ruined about half my childhood. So maybe it's a cyclical thing.
As a Browns fan, how do you feel about Baker? Now do you think he's the franchise quarterback, or what is your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's like one of those things where you look at what is what are you looking for in a quarterback? Or like, as far as, is Baker going to be Patrick Mahomes? No, he's never going to be Patrick Mahomes. Is he ever going to have the physical talent of Josh Allen? No. But I also have to say that, Baker from last year with Freddie Kitchens, which was a nightmare. I guess we didn't really know how to evaluate that, right? I mean, was it him? Was he that bad? Was it all Freddie Kitchens? Was Freddie Kitchens just that bad? And then this year under Kevin Stefanski, I mean, by the end of the year, man, Baker was playing amazing football. And I just thought that I would have said, if you would ask me that question, are they going to give him an extension or does he deserve an extension? Sort of like 4 weeks into the season, I would have said no. Like we can take our chances in the draft or try to trade our way into another QB or something like that. But by the end of the year, I mean, I got to say, like the way that the team is set up it's with the running game and Kevin Stefanski. I think you have to at least extend him and see. So, like I said, is he going to be a top 5 quarterback? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I don't know that they're going to ask him to try to carry the team, but his biggest I think the biggest thing he needs to prove or continue to prove is that, like, if the running game isn't working, can he win it? Can he win a game? You know what I mean? And I don't know that he's shown that a couple times. He showed it at the end of the season where he showed that he might, that he has the potential to do that. But he's got to show that a little bit more frequently for us to be able to say, oh man, this guy's the quarterback for the next 10 years.
I can say as a Broncos fan, y'all are 100% without a doubt better off because let's just say John Elway is having a hard time drafting at the quarterback position. Because I remember 2016, we got Paxton Lynch, and I feel embarrassed to say that, Michael, because like where he.
No, it's such a hit and miss. The draft's such a hit and miss deal, man. You don't know the draft day. It sounds great. Drew Lock. You're just you guys are in the purgatory that a lot of the NFL teams are. It's like you just got to keep cycling through. It's like a pack of baseball cards. You just got to keep flicking through them until you get the guy who's the guy. But you also, I think nowadays, have to be willing to admit when it's not the guy. You know what I mean? Like if Drew Lock's not the guy, you got to say, hey man, you just let's move off him and let's move on. Which it looks like that's what they're going to do this year, right? 10 years ago, when it was like Sam Bradford and the rookie salary structure was different. You had so much money invested in like Sam Bradford. You'd pay him $75 million up front, and they had these locked in, 6-year deals, 5-year deals, or whatever it was that were just like a guaranteed. It was just such you couldn't move on from them. But the way that the rookie salary structure is set up now, you can move on a lot quicker, which I think is for the better for teams that are, so you don't have to be stuck with a guy that you don't want for 3 more years than you should have,
Of course. I could say as a Broncos fan, I don't think Drew Lock is the guy. As much as I would love to, and I compare like his mobility is probably as stiff as a day-old McDonald's fry. I think that he has the talent, maybe. It's just
consistent. I mean, it's can he be consistent? I don't know the answer to that. Like I said, I mean, he can clearly make the plays. He has the ability to make the plays, but it's not about making the plays. And I know, like, just hearing Colin's take on it, I believe was just, you got to be able to show that you can consistently do it. Or he'd have a great game, but then he'd come back and he'd have a bad game. And it's like, you can't be considered a franchise quarterback if they're wondering week to week, if you can do it. You got to just kind of. The bad game has to be the exception, not the
exactly
not like every other game.
Let me be Vic Fangio after last year should have been fired because how do you have 3 timeouts, and then even I'm like, what are you doing? Use the time. Even if let's say you don't win the game, at least you have a better possibility. But
right.
He's like, oh, I should have used the 3 timeouts. And when you look at a head coach, is that it's not just about having the best resume or having the most wins. It's the mentality in a moment. How do you handle? Do you fold under pressure? Do you freak out? And that's why I say Tom Brady is great. He may not have the best arm.
Even Brady has moments like, you remember that time earlier in the year where he forgot how many timeouts they had. It happens to everybody. Fangio is one of those guys where, I mean, he's an elite coordinator. I mean, he's a top 3 defensive coordinator. It's just that, when you move from that coordinator's, booth down to like where you're making all the in-game decisions, I mean, there is a learning curve and there are mistakes that you make. And I don't know that, it's like, he isn't in today's NFL too. It's like having a defensive coach. It's a little bit counter to what the trend of the league is, where a lot of times they want to hire. Nowadays, the trend is to hire a Sean McVay or like an offensive architect that is essentially offensive coordinator and head coach. Fangio's, he's handling the defense basically, and then trying to manage the game. That's just sort of like, I don't know. I don't know how well that model works in the NFL. I think it can work. You know what I mean? Like with Ron Rivera or something like that, where you have to be a really elite leader to be able to succeed long term like that.
Speaking of free agency, somebody has a question here. I don't know. There's been some rumors about this quarterback. Should the Texans move on from Watson? What do you like? What is your thought process on? I know it's been a lot of rumors, but I mean,
well, I think that they've had so much turnover in the organization, and like Nick Caserio is obviously a Bill Belichick, guy. But then there's this weird dynamic where like who's running the team, the owner, McNair, who owned the team, Bob McNair, who founded the team or was the initial owner. Obviously, since he's passed away, it just seems like the organization is like so chaotic, and it's like some people are running things, or there's some guy, Jack Easterby. What's his role? What does he do? There's just some weirdness going on in the building, and I think that it's like one of those things where I don't think Deshaun Watson's into that. It all comes down to this. Is Deshaun Watson willing to sit out in order to never play for the Texans again? If he is, like a Carson Palmer, when Carson Palmer refused to play for the Bengals, and he literally did sit out, and then he eventually engineered a trade out of there. Or are the Texans willing to bite the bullet? I mean, if you got to move before the draft. So if they want to deal him, it's going to be done before the draft because there's no reason to do it. If you're going to trade him, you want the picks. You want to pick this year. You want to try to find, and the other thing too is like, I mean, why the Texans should do it because they traded away so many draft picks. I mean, God, the Dolphins have their top. The Dolphins have their first round pick. They don't have, I don't think they have a pick until the second round. So. I mean, if it was me, like I said, I'm always one of those people. I think you just acknowledge things when they're not good. When it's not going to work, you don't try to make it work for one. You just pull the plug, trade it, get what you can. You can get a couple teams bidding against each other, especially going into the, heading into the draft when everyone's looking for a QB. Probably going to get at least a couple first rounders for them. And whether that's what else beyond that, I don't know, or whether you get players in return, how you work it out. If I was the Texans, I would move on. I think Deshaun Watson's never going to play for them again. It's just a matter of like whether you're never going to play for somebody. It comes time to get your paycheck, and that's when people go from I'm never playing for them again to I'll be there on Monday because it's a lot of money to give up.
Like I was kind of telling people, I think what ruined it all for a lot of these quarterbacks, look what the Lions got for Stafford. Whether it's all on him or not for not winning in the playoffs. That ruined it, in my opinion, for a lot of potential quarterback trades in terms of now. Teams are going to be asking a lot more for their franchise quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson because look what they got for Stafford. No playoff wins, hasn't been the championship game, and that kind of set the domino effect. And I agree. Like I said, I don't think I said that he won't play outside of his rookie contract. I mean, you release one of your starting offensive linemen. You have Laramie Tunsil. It's to the point where you've been at jobs where it's such a disaster to the point where, you know what? I'm gone. Deshaun Watson doesn't come around very often. You don't have a Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson. And so I feel bad for Texas fans. I really do.
Oh, no, I completely agree. I mean, like I said, it's one of these things where we're getting to this new era, though, where it's like, the idea 5 years ago of a quarterback demanding a trade is like laughable. You know what I mean? Like it just never happened because it's like the franchise tag. But I mean, even in this era, it's like, there's even with Russell Wilson speaking out. I mean, really the thing that really kicked this all off, man, to be honest with you, and I never understood it. And this is nothing to do with Nick Caserio. It has to do with Billy O. Was just trading DeAndre Hopkins for nothing. I mean, trading him for David, an often injured David Johnson, who hasn't had a good year for 3 years, and then it's like you trade his best receiver. It's like that's when I was like Deshaun Watson. I mean, you can tell like the minute that happened, it's all been downhill from that point. And I don't think that he trusts the organization. And I think that when you have a situation where neither side trusts each other, how you continue to work in that, even if he did show up, it would be just a bad situation. So
exactly. I remember making one of my first podcasts last year. I said Bill O'Brien needs to be fired right now.
And Bill O'Brien made the playoffs a bunch of times. He's a good coach. It's just that when you get it's very rare that you have coaches that are able to handle both roles. Even Belichick, he's great in like scouring the bargain bin from the cuts on the, training camp free agency and stuff like that. He's a master at that, but he's not good at the draft. They haven't draft. Look at the Patriots roster. I'm just saying, like, how many coach GMs, like, coaches that have full control ever work out? I mean, like, obviously Bill Belichick's, he has total control, and like I said, his hits often come from people that are like undrafted free agents, cut guys that are just like veterans who are cut, and then he just gets them off bad team, puts them on his team, and then they do well. But his draft track record is abysmal. Like, they have no skill position players. So, I mean, it's not even, and like I said, the same thing with Bill O'Brien. I mean, he traded all his picks, and he ends up trading DeAndre Hopkins. It's like, well, what's going on here? So, I don't know where Deshaun Watson ends up. But I say, like, I mean, you hear the Niners, you hear, I guess the Bears' chance to to get him after not getting. I don't know who's got the ammo from a draft capital perspective or player perspective to get him. I think the Niners are. I just keep hearing the Niners and Kyle Shanahan. Like, I don't know. That's the one I keep hearing. But I don't. But that doesn't mean it. That's just me not saying a source or anything. But you just keep hearing those names pop up about potential teams. So.
Well, speaking of, like, I really wanted to ask a question about Colin, not just really for me, but for people. When we see a guy like on camera, we kind of misconceptualize kind of what they're like. So, like, my question is, what are some, like, big misconceptions we as sports fans have about Colin Cowherd as a sports personality on TV?
Well, I mean, so my path, I mean, like, I owe the guy everything. I mean, like, I 7 years ago, I was living in Fort Myers, Florida. I was running a law office, thinking about going to law school, a bunch of other stuff. I mean, like, just living my life, man. I mean, like, trying to survive. I got 3 kids, and you know what I mean? You get kids in the equation. It's like, sometimes you can say you can do what you want to, you can have dreams and aspirations, but you have to do those and do whatever you need to do to survive at the same time, right? So I ended up, this is like 2011 or something like that. I had got a Twitter account. I heard of a podcast. It was like Bill Simmons and Pat Oswalt, and they were talking about Twitter. It was kind of like still, it wasn't really heavily used. And then when I first got on it, it was a lot more. It was less toxic. It was more like clever people, comedians, writers, and it was more about like writing and writing jokes, and, being creative and stuff like that. But anyway, so I ended up writing some jokes to Colin. He ended up kind of liking the jokes. He ended up following my account. We ended up kind of chatting back and forth, and then he ended up coming down to Florida, where he was at ESPN at the time, and he was building a place down there, like a vacation place. But anyways, he was doing a book signing. I ended up going down there to meet up the book signing. We just kind of started talking, and he was just talking about how he recognized me. He knew my Twitter account, he liked it, and then we just kind of formed a line of communication, hung out a couple times. And when he moved over to Fox, he had an opportunity where they were going to give him sort of more reign over his content and, more control over his content, including, this is like, 6, now it kind of seems ridiculous, but I mean, 5-6 years ago, when they were like, he was going to have his own website, like, it was like, what websites are more viable. So that was my intro, was managing, writing and editing theherdnow.com. And so he just basically looked out for me. I mean, like, he didn't have to do any of that. And I've kind of worked my way into the podcast space, just out of, obviously that's the more growing, compared to websites, the podcast is doing a little bit better now. But, like I said, it's all basically like with him, like Colin really is just like kind of like how he doesn't act a certain way on TV or anything like that. But I mean, dude, he's just a really nice guy, and he's really, he's easy to deal with, like on a perspective of like, I mean, some people here, wherever you see a movie where it's like the guy who's like throwing down the food and like, this is a double cap latte or whatever. It's like, that's not Colin at all. And he's just a really hard worker. And like, like I said, the guys that get to the, I've done stuff where, going out there to Fox and stuff. I mean, those guys work their asses off, and Colin works his ass off. And there isn't any really shortcut to any of this stuff, man. I mean, like, I basically fostered a relationship with him, just sort of firing off tweets, bro. Like, I mean, like, and it wasn't, it wasn't like, but that's it's the same thing. It wasn't firing off like, hey, you suck. Like you're nowadays, you know what I mean? Like everybody, it's easy to be critical. It's easy to be, it's easy to harp and like bust on people that like create stuff, right? It's always easy to be that person. It's always harder to create stuff or to, maybe whatever. Like, so Colin also, I don't think, from just like dealing with him on a day-to-day basis, pretty low maintenance. And he also is very good delegator. He hires people that he trusts, and then he lets the people do like us or like the producers or whoever's doing work for him. He doesn't micromanage us. I mean, he trusts us to be able to do what needs to be done. And like you love working for bosses like that. Like I've worked at, man, I've worked at every job, bro. My first job in sports was flipping hamburgers at a minor league baseball stadium. Like, I mean, like legit. Like I was like 22. I wasn't working at ESPN out of college. I was like moved in with my, girlfriend at the time in a small town in Indiana, trying to figure out like what am I doing in my life, So it's like everything doesn't happen immediately. My break didn't happen until I was like 34, 35. But I never gave up on it. And it's one of those things nowadays, it's easier than ever to, there's so much connectivity with like social media, especially like for a guy like yourself trying to get into this, to this business and stuff like that. It's really like compared to like when I was 22, there wasn't a real internet world, like there wasn't like, oh, there's a million internships, like apply from online, it was like you had to like know a person that like worked for the Jets or whatever to get an internship there. So, I mean, it's just one of those things. I'm just very fortunate. Like, I mean, like Colin's sort of decision to take me on as, how like working for him has changed my life, So, I mean, I'm more than a Christian. And like I said, you never hear me say bad words about him.
And my final thought before we kind of end here, because I know you're very busy, but again, we all thank you for coming on. Like we say right here, I hope we stay in touch. But my thought is before we very close to end this is, we as sports fans on camera, we see maybe like what you're doing or Colin, and oh my gosh, he made a take that I don't agree with. Did he really just say that? Mm-hmm. But I think we as sports fans on camera, we see that, but we don't see how much caring person I think that he is, like Colin Cowherd is off camera. By the examples that you've been giving. I think people, you may not agree with their takes. There's some I agree with him and some I don't. But like I said, I appreciate how hard he works and the opportunities he gives people. And that, to me, that's what I admire. I might not always agree with your sports takes, but it's a sports world. We're not always going to agree with what everybody has to say.
Well, right, and at the end of the day, man, I mean, like I said, I think one of those things too. Like, I mean, I'm older, and I'm 42. I've got 3 kids. I mean, you get more perspective the further you go. But I've sort of been like head first into this whole thing, and working in this media space and the sports media world for 6 years now. Like just like straight, just jumping into it and just kind of never stopping and just kind of continually trying to just like survive and what I mean, like thrive and do the work necessary and stuff like that. But it's like as far as with Colin and everything, it's just sports, man. I mean, like, it isn't the end of the world. Like, it's not. We're not talking about, we're not talking about stuff that's like life or death. And everyone has passion for their teams and everything, and I think everyone appreciates that. That like, without the passion or without the fans, like, without people's passive responses, that like, well, whether it's like I hate that take or whether it's like I like that take. Like that fuels the whole thing. Like, you know what I mean? And especially when we talk about football a lot. We talk about football because it's like people care, man. Like, I mean, we talk about like the Eagles or like the Cowboys or something. Like, what this week, Russell Wilson said, I might, if I might something Cowboys. And there's the whole, the sound the alarms. Like everybody in the Cowboy, it's a story in Cowboys Nation for 3 days straight, you know what I mean? So it's like I look at it like I'm a Browns fan or a Buckeyes fan. I get hyped for a little bit. I mean, like I definitely look at things more from a media lens now, where it's like, what's the interesting story? And I think when you get into actual business, you look at things more that way, where you're not looking at it like, oh man, they lost. Like, I hate that guy or whatever. It's like, it's just kind of like, what is that? Like, what's the angle? Like, what's the story? What's the headline out of that? What are we looking for? How are we trying to like create a conversation? And, but yeah, man, I mean, like I said, I think that like Colin said, he said a long time ago, if you listen to me because you hate me, or you listen to me because you absolutely love me, you're still listening. So it's like,
Exactly.
you know, it doesn't really, you know, from that perspective, it's just kind of like, you know, you just kind of want to create an engagement and just, you know, be yourself, and let it go from there and see what happens. But so
I agree. But before we end it here, let's go to tonight's final thoughts. Again, Michael, we know you have a very busy schedule, but before you go, were there any shout-outs or anything that you have for what you do, or anything that you do give shout-outs or anything like that?
No, I mean, I'm working on, you know, like I said, I'm working on the volume sports project with the Colin Company. Working on, still running a bunch of podcasts for him over on, you know, at Fox Sports Radio, like 3 and Out. Jane Slater's podcast, the Jane Slater Boys and Girls podcast, All Ball with Doug Gottlieb, Inside the Parker with Rob Parker. Baseball podcasters will be coming up, starting to fire weekly here coming up. Colin Cowherd Podcast on the volume. A young guy named Alex Monaco who's on there. Really good kid, really hard worker too. We've been working with him, so yeah, man, just check it out. Like, if you just check out any of those, I appreciate it. You know, like and subscribe or whatever. The same story, man. All the way around.
Yeah.
So,
we will put that.
Hopefully you like them, and if you know, check me out on if anyone wants to reach out on LinkedIn or just like ask me some questions, or I'm happy to talk to whoever and help any way I can.
Exactly. Y'all will put that in the section below when this video is over, so people can check it out. Different types of podcasts. But again, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully we'll stay in touch, and hopefully we'll do this again.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Michael Hulse, exclusive interview. Michael, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too.
The Broncos are going to lose today. Never was nothing special. Small. 49ers are biased on KD. That is a stupid idea. No. If I can take it when my team, I'll give the Colts the benefit of the doubt. Madden 21 was so bad.
I'm gonna show last time I'm getting my body.
Has he played? Has he started in the
Right to tell you.
Tag him on Instagram.